One morning, Henry felt sluggish. His fire was slow to start, and it was difficult to raise steam. "Father," he groaned, "my first train is due out soon. I'll be late." "Well, try a bit harder, won't you?" grumbled the fireman. "I'm doing all I can." They needn't have worried. Along came Duck, who buffered up gently in front. "Come on," he smiled, "let's get you to the station." By the time Duck had pushed Henry in front of his coaches, the fire was burning well. With a whoosh of steam, Henry departed right on time. "Thank you for helping me earlier," he said gratefully that night. "Of course," replied Duck. "Used to do it all the time on the Great Western." "Huh," sniffed James. "Henry would be right at home with the other lazy engines on that railway." Henry glared. "They were far from lazy," remarked Duck. "We only moved the bigger engines to help get them started. It's about our duty to the passengers. Anything to keep the trains on time." Gordon and Henry were impressed. James wasn't. He still hadn't forgiven Duck for getting him and the others in trouble with the Fat Controller. Instead of retorting, he started scheming. "We'll see how strong your duty to the passengers is," he muttered darkly. Try as they might, James's crew couldn't get him started the next morning. "I don't understand," sighed the fireman. "There's hardly any steam." Duck was shunting coaches nearby and noticed the commotion. "Having trouble, James?" "Oh, yes, I am," replied James, trying his best to sound feeble. "It's my fire. Please, will you take me to the station?" Duck was doubtful, but knew there was no time to waste. He pulled James all the way to the station. Miraculously, James had a good head of steam by the time they arrived. "There you are," said Duck, and he scampered off to finish shunting. If he hadn't been in such a hurry, Duck may have noticed the smirk that crept across James's face. "That's a good trick," he thought, as he set off with his coaches. He tried it again the next morning. "Will you pull me to the coal bunker? My tender is practically filled with dust." Duck took James to the bunker near the station, then went to prepare another train, thinking he could get away with it. James tried his luck again. "Will you push me onto my train? I still feel rather short of steam." "You poor engine," remarked Duck, "if you really don't feel well." James fought to hide a triumphant grin. "I suppose I'll have to take your train." "What?" cried James. "You're in no condition to pull anything," said Duck knowingly. "We can't expect an ailing engine like you to keep to mainline time. You build steam, then you can do my shunting. Some nice light work." "But I. No," interrupted Duck. "I insist. We must uphold our duty to the passengers, after all." James was speechless. He watched in dismay as Duck hurried off with his train. Duck had a lovely time. The coaches thought him a real gentleman, and the passengers were most impressed. He made good time on the return journey and found the Fat Controller waiting on the platform. "Beg pardon, sir," Duck began. "I apologize that you weren't notified of this change." "You did what was necessary to uphold the schedule," smiled the Fat Controller. "I'm very proud of you. You'll be taking James's trains for the rest of the day. It's just as you said," he finished with a wink. "We can't expect ailing engines to keep to mainline time, can we?" "No, indeed, sir," chuckled Duck. James sulkily shunted for the rest of the day. Gordon and Henry were most amused. They joked about playing Great Western and how fetching he'd look in green. Duck only grinned as James sadly pushed a line of trucks behind him. "Feel better soon, won't you, James?" he whistled. As he watched Duck go, James had no doubt he'd be feeling better quite soon indeed.